pressed. Wonderful. We've got our 10-second moment of uncertainty.
We are live.
And we're live. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Good morning. My name is Robert Baines. I am the President and CEO of the NATO Association of Canada, a charitable NGO dedicated to informing Canadians about the value of security and the importance of NATO. Thoughts about the North Atlantic Treaty Organization do not usually occur to Canadians on a daily basis, but the peace, prosperity, and security that NATO provides are integral to our way of life. The principle that an attack upon one is an attack upon all is the foundation of NATO and maintains peace through strength, perhaps the greatest lesson of the death and destruction from the Second World War. This collective defense draws its strength through unity, and the correlation is, of course, that division is its main weakness. Our discussion today will allow our viewers to see the collaborative nature and spirit of the friendships between Canada, Norway, Iceland, and Denmark when discussing Arctic security, and especially with the added context of NATO. We hope that you will join us and continue to engage with the NATO Association as part of our community, online through Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. I also encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already, so that you can be part of future discussions as well. Currently, we've got so much going on around the globe. First and foremost, of course, is the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but the Arctic has always had an essential spirit for Canada. It's really what we think of ourselves, identify with ourselves: Arctic, cold, winter. Security in the Arctic has been discussed through Canada, through our politicians and our social discussions for quite some time. And the discussion is getting more important right now. With everything that's going on with Russia, the militarization of the Arctic is a huge concern for Canada and the rest of NATO. Today, we're going to discuss these issues with our fabulous guests, three Arctic ambassadors who are also, of course, ambassadors of their countries representing NATO as well. We're excited to be hosting this virtual discussion with Her Excellency Hanne Fugl Eskjaer, Ambassador of the Kingdom of Denmark to Canada, His Excellency Hlynur Gudjonsson, Ambassador of Iceland to Canada, and His Excellency Jon Elvedal Fredriksen, Ambassador of Norway to Canada. Really thrilled to have all three of you here. And obviously the discussion will focus on Arctic security, but also hint on NATO cooperation, building infrastructure in the Arctic, and current geopolitical developments. Allow me to make some brief introductions of each ambassador. Ambassador Eskjaer of the Kingdom of Denmark moved to Ottawa in September of 2019, where she enjoys strengthening the already strong bonds between Canada, Denmark, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands. The ambassador was previously the Arctic ambassador and head of the North American department in Copenhagen. Ambassador Eskjaer has also been the ambassador to Bangladesh, and for the past 23 years held various Ministry of Foreign Affairs positions throughout the world, including Syria, Prague, New York, and now Canada, of course, working on EU, UN, Middle East, Eastern Europe, Asia security, development, Indigenous rights, and cultural policies. Quite the laundry list, I think you'll agree. The ambassador has also worked as senior policy advisor to the Commissioner for Human Rights and Democracy of the Council of the Baltic Sea States and associate professor at the Institute of Political Science, Copenhagen University. Welcome, Ambassador. Ambassador Gudjonsson has been Iceland's ambassador to Canada since August 1st of 2021 and brings with him over 30 years of experience in international trade and investment, public relations and marketing, and politics, of course, in Iceland and North America. Immediately prior to his appointment as ambassador, he served for 15 years as Consul General in New York and Trade Commissioner for North America at the Consulate of Iceland in New York. Tough gig in New York, I know. There he currently served in the roles of Managing Director of Iceland, naturally, General Manager of the Icelandic American Chamber of Commerce, and co-founder and chairman of the board of both the Nordic Innovation House New York and the Foreign Trade Commissioners Association in New York. Prior to his career in the Foreign Service, he was an executive in the seafood industry in the United States and served in various management positions in advertising, public relations, and political campaigns in Iceland. Ambassador Gudjonsson holds a BA degree in history from the University of Iceland and MA in integrated marketing communication from Emerson College in the US. Finally, His Excellency Jon Elvedal Fredriksen, Ambassador of Norway to Canada. Before becoming Norway's ambassador to Canada, the ambassador was a diplomatic advisor to the Prime Minister of Norway. He has previously been Norway's ambassador to Ukraine and Consul General of Norway in Murmansk, Russia, and has extensive experience with Arctic affairs and security policy. Mr. Fredriksen is a graduate of the University of Tromsø, Norway, in Russian studies, world literature, and structural linguistics. Welcome all. I really appreciate you being here for this great discussion today. And we'll start with opening remarks from each ambassador. And Ambassador Eskjaer of Denmark, please set the scene from the Danish perspective. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Robert, and welcome to all of you on this event on Arctic trends and security. And as you said, seen from the perspective from Norway, Iceland, and Denmark, all NATO members and Arctic as well. Thank you very much to the NATO Association of Canada really putting the emphasis on this very important topic. And of course, very warm welcome to all in our audience. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. We would really love to have the time to hear your perspective, to get your questions and your input, because that is such an important part of our work as ambassadors here in Canada. Unfortunately, we need to start outside the Arctic with this important discussion today, and that is, of course, in Ukraine. Since the beginning of Russia's brutal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, Denmark, Iceland, and Norway, together with our NATO allies, have been very clear in underlining that we stand steadfast in our support to the people of Ukraine in the fight for the freedom and their longing for peace. And honestly, I would say that February 24th really stand as the worst days in modern European history when we look at it today. And as a result of Russia's aggressions towards Ukraine, in March 3rd, Denmark, Norway, and Iceland, together with our Arctic state allies, we announced that we would not travel to Russia for meetings in the Arctic Council. Russia was at that time having the chairmanship of the Arctic Council, and this was a very clear message. So it was decided to temporarily pause participation in all meetings in the Arctic Council. But during this strategic pause, we are looking at modalities for future cooperation. We're discussing that, and that's being done by our senior Arctic officials at this moment. It is important for us that we secure the Arctic Council as an institution, but also at this primary forum for Arctic cooperation to the benefit of the peoples living in the Arctic, because the Arctic Council have for so many years delivered very important results for the people living in the Arctic. And for the Kingdom of Denmark that you're referring to, Robert, when it comes to decisions that are impacting the Arctic affairs, we coordinate our positions very closely between the three parts of the realm, as you mentioned, Denmark, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands. And we agree that it is not possible to cooperate with Russia, given the current circumstances. And at the same time, it is important that we find what we call balanced solutions that are workable both in the short term and at the same time does not jeopardize the council in the long term. It sounds easy, it might not be in reality, but we are trying to find that right balance. So in other words, when we talk about the Arctic, we currently are in a situation where the work of the Arctic Council is on a pause. But it's also clear that the Arctic cooperation is just as important as today as it was before the invasion. And that when we look at the Arctic challenges, cooperation in our region is a must in order to deal with the key trends and challenges. And I'll just mention a few of those. Of course, climate change stands out as a very important one. Sustainable economic development, environment, search and rescue, infrastructure, connectivity. The list is quite long and really important. And the close people-to-people contacts are very important ingredient, I would say, in all this cooperation. And we must take, and this is really important, the appropriate steps to really keep the conflict away from the region and continue to strive towards the low tensions. My colleagues will elaborate on these key areas that we have identified together after this introduction. Another thing that is common for all of these trends and challenges is that in the Arctic, is that the peoples living in the region, many of them being indigenous, are very dependent on how we manage to tackle these challenges. There are not a lot of alternatives, so we really have to get it right. And the Arctic, being the vulnerable environment and climate that it is, really relies on the cooperation of all Arctic states, especially, I would say, when it comes to when you look at the mitigation of climate change, but also the promotion of economic growth. The Nordic countries that we are all representing have, we think, shown the way by proving that actually climate change can work hand in hand with the economic growth and job creation that is so important for that region. What we're doing is that we're putting science-based research cooperation at the center of our policy. We think that research is the best way to gather a better understanding of the deep impact of the climate change place in the region, but also to position us in a better way to promote the cultural, social, economic, and commercial developments in the Arctic. I'd just like to give you one example from the Kingdom of Denmark, where we are very focused on the implementation of the new renewable energy sources, but also to attract investment to the Arctic, and at the same time increase our energy security, which has become even more important after the invasion, and reducing the local greenhouse gas emission. I would say if you manage to get that package right, it's really a win-win-win. And currently we're working closely with the Greenlandic government in developing hydro capabilities, which is a long-term and very important engagement for both of our governments. And Canada has a lot of very important knowledge in those areas. You could also mention examples for when it comes to critical infrastructure, such as airports, dealing with the vast distances between community, which is often a challenge. We've also seen that during COVID and with connectivity. I've personally experienced that challenge here in Canada. I was traveling very recently to the northern Manitoba to a Cree Nation community that was only a fly-in. They have winter roads for 2 months for the year. So we are talking real challenges and an important area that we have to engage in. And as we try to enhance cooperation and security in the region, we must, of course, take the current geopolitical realities and rivalries into account. We have for a while, also before the invasion, witnessed Russia increasing its military buildup in the Arctic. And we have seen that these actions have prompted other Arctic states to strengthen our Arctic defense and military capabilities. This is the case for Arctic NATO countries as well. And also for the Kingdom of Denmark, we are no exception. Currently, the three governments are in dialogue regarding a capability package in the Arctic for more than 300 million Canadian dollars. And the intention behind this package, just as an example, is to increase our presence, to increase our situational awareness, and also to be able to uphold our sovereignty. And it's important to mention that this package would not only benefit our military abilities, but also very much the civilian ones. Because it is a fact, due to the harsh climate in the Arctic, many of the civilian tasks can only be provided by military equipment. We have to keep that in mind when we look at developments in the Arctic. Our assessment at the moment is that the Russia's invasion has not yet altered the security situation in the Arctic. But it is too early to assess, you could say, the long-term consequences. And it is potentially a problem when you see an increased unpredictability, a lack of transparency, the risk of misperceptions, and unintended military escalation. It can pose a challenge to the Arctic that we have to keep in mind. So it's really important for us, and that could be a topic also of today, to look at risk reduction options. So to conclude, Arctic security has been and still is at the forefront of our Arctic policies. It goes for all three of us, because we believe that we must continue to strive for low tension in the region. Cooperation is a must if we are going to pursue our primary goal of safeguarding the Arctic and also supporting the Arctic people. I'll now pass the floor to my Icelandic colleague Hlynur for addressing some of these key challenges and trends. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanne. And thank you to the NATO Association for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. Arctic affairs touch up on almost all aspects of Icelandic society and is a priority area in Iceland's foreign policy. Iceland's Arctic policy emphasizes the importance of Arctic cooperation, particularly within the Arctic Council, which has become the preeminent forum for discussing the future of the Arctic and well-being of its people, and will continue to be so. Russia has, for the moment and for the time being, chosen to abandon the fundamental consensus which underlines the cooperation. Russia has abandoned this community of states that base their relations on international law. To look a little bit further into some of the issues that Hanne mentioned, climate change, environmental protection, safeguarding the health of the marine environment, and improving access to renewable energy sources are vitally important parts of Nordic Arctic policies. Sustainable development remains our guiding principle, firmly anchored within the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There is much work being done within the Arctic Council Sustainable Development Working Groups, work that is essential to the future living in the Arctic, such as the Zero Arctic project, focused on developing concepts for carbon neutral construction in the Arctic, sustainable buildings, sustainable infrastructure, sustainable energy. There are around 130 projects ongoing within the Arctic Council's working group that have to do with our sustainable future living in the Arctic, and many of them have global reach and implications. The Arctic is a home to around 4 million people. We need to ensure the welfare of the inhabitants of the Arctic region, including their opportunities to earn a living and their access to digital communications, education, and healthcare services. Iceland has solved many of its infrastructure challenges, but it is a work to be continued. Solid infrastructure, access to healthcare, digital and physical, access to healthcare, access to hospitals, access to education, submarine cables, connectivity and redundancy in data and electrical grids, etc., is what determines the future and prosperity of our nations and the security of our nations and communities. Some of those infrastructure projects are daunting. For example, 81% of Greenland's 2 million square kilometers are covered by ice, and a portion of the population lives remote and isolated. How do you supply those communities with energy, water, and heat? How do you connect the remote areas in Iceland in a way that they are competitive, making it possible to have a future in those areas? How do you deal with high transportation costs? For example, in North Norway, long distances, low population density, lack of secure electronic communication networks in pretty much all of the Arctic, crucial for job creation in urban and outlying areas in the region. The global financial firm Guggenheim compiled a list in 2016 of 900 planned, in progress, completed, and canceled infrastructure projects in the Arctic. The estimated cost was $1 trillion US dollars of infrastructure investment over 15 years. Infrastructure development, such as ports and harbors, mines, roads, broadband connectivity, airport, and logistics, is crucial for sustainable economic development in the Arctic. And it is happening. At the Arctic Circle in Iceland last October, I attended a presentation by the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure, Minerals and Gender Equality in Greenland. It was a mind-blowing presentation on infrastructure projects in Greenland. 3 major airports, air terminals, hotels, etc., executed in partnership with other neighbors, but on local terms. The Arctic has been a peaceful region, and the Nordics will strive to keep it so. But military developments and competition for energy resources and minerals, transportation and food security, as well as Russian aggression, politically and military, risk destabilizing the outlook of peace and prosperity in the Arctic. We cannot let that happen. As Ambassador Eskjaer mentioned earlier, the Arctic ambassadors of the Nordic countries, Canada and the US, so-called Arctic 7 or A7, have kept their consultation going. While it is clear that no work will proceed under the auspices of the Arctic Council in the immediate future, we are committed to finding ways to resume cooperation to the extent possible. That means without Russia in the short term, together with Russia, possibly in the long term, objective as noted in the introduction. At the time of the pause, an impressive 128 projects were in process under the auspices of the Arctic Council in its 6 working groups. Roughly a third of those that had active Russian participation. That leaves just under 100 projects that, in theory at least, could continue and are essential to the infrastructure build, connectivity and sustainable development of the region. So to conclude, Iceland in this case is of the opinion that where Russia isn't a part to a given project, the project should not be halted, and the project leads should be given free reins to consult and decide as they would under normal conditions. The future prosperity of the Arctic communities relies on this work. And over to my colleague, Jon.
Well, thank you, Hlynur and Hanne. Well, my 2 colleagues have said most of what needs to be said, I think, for introductions. So maybe just a couple of points from me. And I think I'll pick up on a point made by Hlynur to the fact that security in the north and security in the Arctic, if you like to use that expression, is not only about hard security. That might be what you want to talk about if you join the NATO association event, but infrastructure has been mentioned and security for people has been mentioned. I think security and climate is important to keep in mind. This is a topic that will not go away in spite of all the global crisis or crisis that we are now seeing in Europe. As diplomats, we know that unfortunately one crisis does not eliminate another. So the climate issue is there to stay, and we have to address it also in the security framework. So Norway is currently a member of the UN Security Council, and climate security was one of the priorities that we decided to bring with us into the council, with the thought of bringing this to the fore and get other members of the council to join us in addressing this issue globally, but not least, of course, with a look to the Arctic. I cannot say we have been as successful as we maybe had wanted to be from the Norwegian side. Certain P5 members did not agree that this is something we could, for instance, make a declaration on. But we're still working on it in the Council and in the UN on a much broader scope. And in connection with that, I think it's important to highlight what Canada is doing within NATO. Where Canada has declared its intention to set up a center of excellence for climate and security, something we very much support. I think all 3 of us, and from the Norwegian side, we intend to engage actively with Canada on that issue. So it's definitely something we'd like to see more of. So I commend Canada for that. I think another point I could make is that we have discussed here the Arctic Council. My colleagues mentioned both of them, and we definitely, from the Norwegian side, we share the principled approach that we now have to the work in the Arctic Council. We are in the process of consulting with each other how to move forward. But Norway is definitely on the same page here as Denmark and Iceland. But there are other structures as well in our region, so-called sub-regional councils. Barents Euro-Arctic Council is one. You have the Baltic Sea Cooperation. You have the so-called Northern Dimension. So there are a sort of a set of regional and sub-regional structures. The situation is very much the same. They have been based on cooperating with Russia in one or several or even all dimensions of those councils. And we have the same issue right now, that with the behavior that we have seen from Russia and Ukraine and the totally unacceptable attack on Ukraine, we cannot continue business as usual in any of those structures either. And that affects most Nordic countries. It certainly affects Norway, which has been, I think it's fair to say, a participating architect in most of those structures. When it comes to the Barents Cooperation, which is very close to us, and which has been a very important instrument for 30 years, for building also people-to-people relations with Russia and Russian regions. We have frozen the work for now, and we will have to look at how we proceed together with our partners. But what I'm trying to say also, the conflict in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, what Russia has done is making this affect a lot of people in the Arctic region, in the Nordic countries and in Russia itself, and in other partner countries as well. People who have done a tremendous job over decades to address important Arctic issues that we have. Some of those lying outside the mandate of the Arctic Council, and to just reiterate, building people-to-people relations. All this is now endangered. When it comes to the Nordic countries, as you may know, we have other mechanisms for cooperating. We have the Nordic Council and a lot of Nordic structures to cooperate in. So the regional councils that I'm talking about has to a large extent been built up to include Russian regions and to incorporate Russia in Northern European structures. So all this has been put endangered by the actions of the Russian government, unfortunately. The last point I think I would like to make is that we, of course, has to look at security in the north also from a global perspective. I think it's very important, especially in the current situation that we are now, with a war ongoing in Europe and with the strategic pauses that we have put on especially the Arctic Council, that we continue to, from our countries, Canada, Norway, Iceland, and our good partners, to uphold the principle that the Arctic region is not some kind of disputed area, that is not an area for conflict. It's not an area where there is a power vacuum of any sort. We do have mechanisms for dealing with issues in the Arctic, and there are international law that applies to the Arctic Ocean as it applies elsewhere. So to keep this area as an area of peace, stability, and cooperation is still very much our goal in the time that comes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all three of you, Excellencies. I'd now like to just ask 4 questions before we get on to our questions from YouTube. If you are on YouTube watching this, please do feel free to enter any questions. I think we're going to try to get through our prepared questions as quickly as possible so that we can give you some time to interact, which is always an important aspect. But first of all, our first question is just a little bit about the interaction of Arctic security and NATO specifically. All 3 of you ambassadors are representing founding members of NATO, and as such, you've contributed to the alliance over 7 decades. How would you describe the importance of this cooperation in preserving the rules-based international order, and especially when considering issues of Arctic security, that interaction between NATO and the Arctic? We already talked about trying to keep things somewhat non-military in the Arctic. I'd love to hear a little bit about any thoughts you have on that, considering those issues on the importance of preserving the rules-based international order and the play between the Arctic Council and NATO. So any three of you have? Okay, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Just to kick it off, and I think get us through so we can get the questions from our audience. I think your question really points to something which is quite key, and that is that NATO is at its core a value-based alliance. So defending those values, and that includes the rule-based order, is the key, and that is a way to promote our own interest and security, but also the stability more broadly. Many of us, we have most of the Arctic countries also part of the NATO alliance. 4 out of 5 Arctic coastal states are part of it. And I think it's important that we as Arctic states, all 3 of us here today, we have a special role and we have a special interest, but also special responsibility when we look at the Arctic, no matter what the context is. And that also goes for NATO. So I think we have a special role. We need to take the lead, and it needs to start with what is in the interest of the people living in the region, not anywhere else. I think that's a key point. And I think a second key point is that any initiative that might be taken within NATO at some point needs to be tailor-made, and it needs to be made in a way where we avoid any escalation of tension in the region, because that is, as I think we have all 3 of us underlined as a key aspect, that would be against any of our ambition and interest. We want to keep this as low tension and an area of cooperation, as both my Icelandic and Norwegian colleague mentioned.
Ambassador Gudjonsson, Fredriksen?
Yeah, just to add a little bit to what Hanne and Jon were saying on the regional cooperation, for example. I mean, NATO's area of responsibility extends to the high north, and the alliance therefore maintains a robust focus in the region. Forces such as NORDEFCO and the Northern Group have intensified their cooperation in the area. Regional cooperation will play an increasingly important role, and for this we have several forces such as the NORDEFCO, as I mentioned, the Northern Group, GEF, and the Arctic Security Forces Round Table. And on the Iceland side, on the question what we have contributed, and Iceland contributes to the situational awareness in the region through, amongst other things, the operation of the Iceland air defense system. Iceland has as well provided operational support at Kiev airport, etc. And to Jon on that, there is not a vacuum in the Arctic to security and defense, and our allies and partners have considerably increased their military budgets, reviewed their Arctic policies, documents, and adapted their posture and activities in the northern regions in the past years. So even though our attention is now on Russia and the Ukraine, we must stay vigilant also in the Arctic.
Well, exactly, and I think it's just important to underline that NATO's operational area is NATO's operational area. There are no exceptions from that. If you're a NATO member, all of your territory is covered by all the articles in the North Atlantic Treaty. So, but that is not to say that we do not have focus on handling what we see of security issues in the north as best we can, and we have done that for decades since NATO was founded. Norway, for example, has for decades not conducted exercises directly on the land border that we have with Russia. This is something we unilaterally have decided over decades not to do, to make sure that there are no misunderstandings, no miscalculations on any side. Just to give one example of what is reassuring and a part of being transparent, predictable, and very firm in dealing with Russia in the north.
Wonderful. Well, then if I could also just, Ambassador Gudjonsson, you were talking a little bit about the infrastructure and how many projects there actually are underway. If you or if anybody would like to talk a little bit about more how each of your respective countries and Canada could cooperate in building infrastructure that would ensure peace and security. We've heard a lot about Russian resurgence in infrastructure, many old bases being refurbished, etc. So I'm just curious as far as the infrastructure that would ensure peace and security in the Arctic from the NATO side, if you will.
Well, I can pick up the thread here. We should discuss in this context on infrastructure that would, as you mentioned, public-private partnership and partnership between our industries and our governments and industries on projects related to energy security, district heating, rechargeable batteries, etc. The portfolio of solutions needed for energy security, for example, in the Arctic, is not going to be solved locally. I mean, this is something that we all of us need to step outside of our borders and see where we can get the technology that is needed, because it's a diverse technology. It's a diverse portfolio of solutions that we need depending on the area. So we need to look outside of our narrow business interest and invite our Arctic partners into the fold. I think also the importance of bilateral dialogues cannot be understated. For example, between Iceland and Canada on security and defense, policy, trade, and investments, that the Nordics have been having and probably seen an increased activity there in the past few years. And also multilateral dialogue between, for example, the Arctic 7 are crucial at this point. And projects such as that Jon mentioned, the NATO Center of Excellence on Climate and Security is one such multilateral project that we need to pay attention to, and I think we will. And I believe, due to the civilian nature of the center, it will be very important for Arctic development and security.
Yes, just to follow up on that, I think one thing we have to keep in mind, all of us, is that the geographical and the demographical differences between Canada and the Nordic Arctic, if you like, are enormous. I mean, the vastness and also in climate terms, there are huge differences. Of course, Greenland has some of the same features as the Arctic Canada, but if you go to the European mainland and also even the Norwegian archipelago, Svalbard in the Arctic, it's different. So there, it means the climatic conditions there mean that there is a lot of infrastructure in place that you will not find in the Canadian Arctic. But in spite of those differences, I totally agree. There is no reason for us not to cooperate closely on what we have to address in the future. And I think there's every reason for Canada and our countries to have a close dialogue on these issues when it relates to, again, coming back to the climate issue. How do you build infrastructure in the coming decades? Maybe we have to do this in a different way. I mean, we have a lot of challenges in Norway as well when it comes to floods, and then when it comes to milder winters and things like that will change the facts and figures of how you build infrastructure and how we maintain the existing infrastructure. And that goes for civilian infrastructure as well as military infrastructure, basically a lot of the same problems. So I think for us to have a close dialogue with Canada on those issues would be a very good idea, and vice versa.
Ambassador Eskjaer, anything to add? Or Okay.
I think it's well covered by my colleague.
We do have quite a lot, and we've got quite a few questions from our audience, so that's wonderful. I'll just briefly touch on this one then. Obviously, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia is hovering over everything at the moment. The international community has been responding. Canada, of course, has been, and all three of you represent countries that have been contributing significantly. Do you want to just each of you comment briefly on NATO's response and your own country's contributions, just in a general sense? Go ahead, Ambassador.
I can jump in. I think that NATO has been very clear in its messaging that we are capable and we are ready to defend every inch of the NATO territory. I think that's been a clear message from day one. And not as surprising to me, but still a very important one. Just quickly, in Denmark, we have responded very quickly with new contributions on the eastern flank. Right now, we have a deployment of almost 800 personnel on the way to Latvia, where we will be cooperating very closely with a large contingent from Canada. And I think it's important that we really do everything that we can to react and have a reassure our Eastern allies, but in a proportional and non-escalatory way. And that is, again, finding that balance. But clearly, extra resources are definitely invested in the Eastern flank.
Ambassador Gudjonsson?
I mean, yeah, I agree with what Hanne said there. But on the Iceland side, Iceland will continue to swiftly implement the EU sanction against Russia, provide humanitarian and other support, and welcome refugees in Iceland. I think at this point we have over 800 Ukrainians that have applied for international protection in Iceland, and a part of the group has arrived, and Iceland has spent, I think, close to 600 million krona on humanitarian and emergency aid to Ukraine, and the support continues. Ultimately, the strongest measure I think we have against the Russian threat is our political unity. We will not compromise on the fundamental principles of our region's security, and our values must remain at the core of our actions. And I think that is what you've seen from NATO, and I think that's what you've seen from the Nordics as well.
And Ambassador Fredriksen?
No, exactly. I mean, from the Norwegian side, we have followed the EU's sanctions to the letter. We did the same in 2014, and the reason for that is simple enough. Even if we're not an EU member, we are a part of the single market. So for us to follow EU in sanctions terms is a natural thing to do. In political terms, you have a blatant breach of Article 50 in the UN Charter. It's not even up for debate. And so for us to follow our partners in sanctions against Russia in this instance is quite obvious. And again, military support. Norway has supplied 4,000 M72s to Ukraine. A lot of non-lethal stuff as well. I'm not going to tell you about it all. Also, anti-air missiles have been supported, and we are also looking at participating, or we have decided to participate in the British-led fund for aiding Ukraine military. And I think also in terms of weapon assistance, we will see more in the pipeline from our side, and we have also allocated 2 billion Norwegian kroner. That would be about, I think, 300 million Canadian dollars to humanitarian aid immediately to Ukraine, and more to follow, as well as budget support to the Ukrainian government. So our support is firm, and it's a continuation of support, especially on the civilian side, that we have given to Ukraine since 2014. So it's not a new policy from our side.
And it reminds you of the collaborative nature of the alliance, how much all of this is compounding. This is three NATO partners talking. We've got another 17 or sorry, 27 altogether, plus the NATO partners. So it does really start to add up. Let's just briefly address something that's been in the news quite a bit, considering welcoming Finland and Sweden as members of NATO. Could each of you share some insight on the topic? Obviously, the discussions have been rampant and very interesting. Ambassador Eskjaer, you want to start it off?
Well, I can just say that we would welcome, of course, Finland and Sweden with open arms. It would only make the alliance stronger, but it is first and foremost a national decision of the two countries. So we are respectful of that and are in close dialogue, as we have been always between the Nordic countries. So, but that is our stance. It is a national decision that we would welcome if they would take it in this direction.
Ambassador Gudjonsson?
I fully agree with Hanne on this, and I also, I mean, the membership of Finland and Sweden to NATO would strengthen Baltic security, Northern European security, and Nordic cooperation on security and defense. So Iceland fully supports the membership.
And Ambassador Fredriksen, of course, they've both been participating in many NATO exercises. The last one, last month on your own territory?
Yes, absolutely. Again, we fully support Sweden and Finland if they decides to apply to join the alliance. No doubt about that. And I agree with my colleagues that this would actually strengthen security in our part of the world. But you're right. The military cooperation with Sweden and Finland is ongoing. There's a Nordic cooperation. There's also a trilateral cooperation, Norway, Sweden, and Finland, which goes quite deep when it comes to military coordination and cooperation, training, exercises, exchange on military academies, and so on. So, and this is not new at all. We've been doing this for quite a number of years. I think it's also something we can tell our viewers here today that there is a declaration of solidarity between the Nordic countries back to 2009. It's not an Article 5 declaration, but it's a declaration of solidarity. And I think Canadians who look into the matter will find that the solidarity between populations in the Nordic countries goes very, very deep and have very deep historical roots.
Wonderful. All right. Well, without further ado, let's tackle some of the questions from the audience. Andrew Erskine, I'm so sorry. We're only going to be able to ask one of your questions, but Andrew Erskine asks, how do you see the engagement of extra-regional powers, particularly that of China, of course, in the geosecurity architecture of the Arctic?
I can start if you'd like to.
Go ahead.
Well, I think it's a very clear policy of the Arctic Council that we welcome contributions from non-Arctic observers, and China is one of the observers. And of course, it needs to be within the framework and the values and the rules of the Arctic Council. So the Arctic countries will forever be in the lead, because it is our people in the region that we're relating to. But in terms of research, for example, other players can play an important role. This also goes for the EU. Huge investments in Arctic research that are very valuable. It goes for Korea, Japan, many other countries. So we welcome that within the rules of the game, which is the Arctic lead within the Arctic Council.
Ambassador Gudjonsson, Fredriksen, anything to add?
Well, I can just add that for our part, it's been important, and it is important to have a fact-based approach to that issue. So when it comes to China, we look at what China is doing and not doing in the Arctic. I think there are sometimes some misconceptions about that, and personally, I would. If I wanted to look into the issue, I would not put Russia and China in the same box when talking about the Arctic to analyze that issue. And as Hanne said, external actors. It's not only China. There are other countries and actors as well who have an interest, legitimate interest in what's going on in the Arctic, and have opinions and policies on the Arctic. And we have to, as Arctic states, to take all of that into account. So it's a complex issue. It's not straightforward as it's sometimes portrayed in the media.
Ambassador Gudjonsson?
Just add a little bit to this. I mentioned this presentation I watched at the Arctic Circle in Iceland last year by the Minister of Housing in Greenland. And one thing she said, and I mentioned that those infrastructure projects, I mean, the decision in the end is local. And one part of her speech kind of caught me really at the time, and where she said nothing about us without us. So whatever China is doing or their interest in the Arctic, it is also a sovereignty issue, and it's down to each of the those sovereignties within the Arctic to decide where and whom they are working with. But at the same time, this is also, as Hanne mentioned, and the decision by the Arctic Council is very clear on partners on how that is done.
Thank you to all three of you. We now have a question from Whitney Lockenbauer, our probably preeminent Arctic security bigwig here in Canada, who thanks you all for your presentations. And all of you referred to climate change. Could you please comment on the NATO climate security and security action plan and how NATO allies can work through the alliance to bolster our resilience and collective action in preparing and responding to climate change related emergencies in the Arctic? Who would like to take this on? Okay, Ambassador Fredriksen.
I can go first if you like. I'm not sure if I be able to answer the esteemed Mr. Lockenbauer's question in full, but I guess there are two related issues when we talk about climate and security, and when we talk about that in the Arctic as well. You have how climate change itself poses a threat right now and in the future to come. And you have a little bit different issue of how what we are doing, both in civilian terms and in military terms in the Arctic, impacts the Arctic, and that will change as the climate change. And then you have the more sort of hard question of how do you actually set up both civilian companies and infrastructure, and how do you set up military presence in the Arctic when the climate is changing. So there's a sort of bundle of issues to be dealt with in that respect. And again, coming back to the Canadian proposal for setting up a center of excellence, I think that these would be the exact issues to address and through that center of excellence, and obviously also questions that we need to discuss in a much broader sense. I think when it comes to climate change in the UN setting, this it will have to. We are convinced that it will have to be on the table of the Security Council, one way or another. There's no way around it, also obviously other UN bodies will have to address the issue on a global scale as well. And it will be, as it already is, a part of our national policies. So the climate issue is global, and it will have to be dealt with from, if you like, attacked from a lot of different angles.
Right. Ambassador Gudjonsson?
I have nothing to add. I think Jon and
sure thing.
I'm not covered. So.
Ambassador Eskjaer at all?
Maybe just a short principle point. I think it's very good that NATO addresses this in a strategic way and a long-term way. So just to respond directly to that part of the question. And I think it actually illustrates that when we talk about climate change in the Arctic, the root of the climate change does not really start in the Arctic. It starts so many other places, including the NATO countries, including the observers to the Arctic Council. So having others commit to a real change that would mitigate some of the climate change consequences that we foresee in the Arctic is extremely important. So having an ownership from both NATO, EU, non-Arctic observers to the Arctic Council is key to actually achieve our goals in the Arctic.
And the Secretary General's own personal interest in the whole topic seems to have made quite an impression. And of course, it's been climate security and climate change have worked its way into every single communique, I believe, now since the end of 2019. So it's great to see that now always included. We have a question from Heather Exner-Poirot. What role do you see the Arctic in providing hydrocarbons and critical minerals as the West tries to develop greater energy and supply chain independence? So we were talking a little bit about energy security. Would anybody like to take that specifically? Anybody at all? Go ahead, Ambassador Fredriksen.
Well, the whole issue that is mentioned here now on obviously on the critical minerals and energy is critical now. Not only for Europe, but globally, right here and now because of all what's happening in Europe, but not only because of that. And critical rare earth minerals is a huge issue in the years to come. When it comes to the Arctic, of course, we have to have a balanced approach. There's no doubt about the need to exploit those resources that we have when it comes to minerals. And also when it comes to energy, the Norwegian policy is that, well, we are still an oil and gas producing country, offshore in our case, and we will continue to be that for a number of years. We will, both in the Arctic part on the Norwegian shelf and the non-Arctic part of the Norwegian shelf, extract those hydrocarbons in as an environmental friendly way as possible, with as low emissions as possible. And that is happening right now. A lot of measures being taken, and all new fields having extremely strict regulatory frameworks around them. I see that Canada has a similar approach. We just got approved a new oil field in Canada, Bay du Nord, which of course will be developed, I think, in an extremely low emission way, with, among other Norwegian participants. And for instance, in Norway, there has also been projects to electrify the shelf, as we call it, to take hydropower from onshore to power the platforms in the North Sea and the Barents Sea. And this is the way to go.
Ambassador, I'm afraid I'm gonna have to just stop you there. We've got one more, which is more of just a yes or no question. I was hoping one of you would be able to answer this. David Tom Kulak asks that he recognized this is a limited area that can be spoken on, but is there a sustainable development plan for Arctic shipping that addresses commercial and NATO interests? Do any of you know if that is the case? Ambassador Eskjaer, you're nodding.
Yeah, we have had through the Arctic Economic Council quite a focus on sustainable shipping in the Arctic, heavy fuel regulations, shipping routes, etc. So it is one of the, you could say, key challenges for you could say developing business in the Arctic in the long term. It has to be done in the sustainable way. It's a very fragile. If you have any spills in the Arctic, so that's a very strategic focus on that, and with the shipping routes changing and opening up, I think we would have to work even more concrete on that. So it is a challenge. We haven't solved it, but it's definitely on the table.
Certainly. Well, if this panel has shown nothing else, it's the collaborative nature of the problem solving that goes on here, both at the Arctic Council, NATO, all parts of the multilateral rules-based international order are working, bending their will towards many different problems. It's an absolute pleasure to speak with all of you, Ambassador Eskjaer, Ambassador Gudjonsson, and Ambassador Fredriksen. It's been a true pleasure. And I really do hope that we have a chance to interact, hopefully in person, in the coming months. There are many different tales to tell about NATO and the importance of collaboration. And again, all of those who are listening, please feel free to join us and our community on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and make sure that you do subscribe to us on YouTube for future discussions. Thank you, all three of you, so much for being part of this discussion. Really appreciate it and hope to see you soon. Thanks so much.